When it comes to the dark underbelly of organized crime, few things shock more than the violent world of Mexican drug cartels. Over the years, these ruthless groups have left a trail of horrifyingly brutal deaths, each more chilling than the last, highlighting the extreme lengths they go to maintain power. In May 2012, a chilling discovery along a highway in Cadereyta, Jimenez, Nuevo León, stunned Mexico and the world. Authorities found 49 mutilated bodies, 43 men and 6 women, dumped in black plastic bags beside the road. None of them had heads, hands, or feet, making identification nearly impossible. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare, the kind of violence that showed just how far Mexico's drug war had spiraled out of control. The Cadereyta Jimenez massacre was not just another cartel killing. It was a calculated act of terror, a grim message meant for everyone, including rival gangs, law enforcement, and ordinary citizens. Behind it all was the infamous Los Zetas cartel, one of the most feared criminal organizations in Mexico. The group, made up of former elite soldiers turned mercenaries, had built a reputation for turning brutality into a calling card. They did not just fight their enemies, they terrified them. The motive was part of a ruthless turf war between Los Zetas and their rivals, the Gulf Cartel, over control of smuggling routes that run through northern Mexico into the United States. Both groups wanted dominance over the same territory, and every massacre, kidnapping, and public display of violence became a twisted form of communication. In Cadereyta, that message was written not in words but in blood. Authorities initially found a banner at the scene claiming that the Gulf Cartel was responsible, but investigators quickly suspected it was a diversion. Los Zetas were notorious for planting false clues to confuse law enforcement and make their enemies look guilty. Over time, evidence and intelligence reports pointed strongly toward Los Zetas as the true perpetrators. What made the massacre especially horrifying was its scale and its anonymity. Because the victims had been so brutally disfigured, most of them could not be identified. Forensic experts worked tirelessly for months, using DNA testing to match what little evidence remained. Some victims were believed to be migrants from southern Mexico or Central America, people who were simply traveling north in search of a better life, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. That revelation gave the massacre an even darker edge. It was not just a gang war, it was innocent lives erased for the sake of fear and power. The discovery sent shockwaves through Mexico. News channels broadcast the gruesome images, and the country was once again forced to confront the horrifying reality of the drug war that had claimed tens of thousands of lives. The government condemned the act and vowed to track down those responsible, but arrests were limited and convictions were few. Like many violent acts of the cartel wars, the Cadereyta massacre became another symbol of how deeply violence had taken root in the region. Beyond the immediate horror, the massacre also reflected a deeper issue, the breakdown of social order in parts of Mexico, where cartels had become the de facto authority. Towns lived in fear, police forces were often outgunned, and civilians learned to stay silent. For many, Cadereyta was not just an atrocity, it was a warning that no one was truly safe. Years later, the incident still stands as one of the darkest moments in Mexico's modern history. It represents the point where brutality stopped being shocking and became disturbingly routine. The 49 victims of Cadereyta Jimenez remain a haunting reminder of what happens when power, greed, and impunity collide. Their identities may never all be known, but their deaths marked a grim chapter in the story of a nation still struggling to end its cycle of violence. On August 25, 2011, the city of Monterrey, one of Mexico's most developed and prosperous urban centers, experienced a tragedy that shook the nation and the world. The Casino Royale, a place where people went to relax, gamble, and spend an evening with friends, became the site of one of the deadliest civilian attacks in Mexico's modern history. That afternoon, a group of armed men associated with the Los Zetas cartel stormed the casino, not with the intent to rob, but to punish. They carried gasoline cans and weapons, forcing their way in and quickly turning what should have been a night of entertainment into a scene of horror and terror. People inside initially thought it was a robbery or some prank, but the attackers' true purpose soon became clear. Flames engulfed the building, thick smoke spread, and chaos erupted. In a matter of minutes, 52 people lost their lives, trapped inside the burning structure, including employees and patrons who had done nothing more than spend an evening at the casino. The motive behind this attack was chillingly calculated. The casino's owners had reportedly refused to pay quota, or protection money, demanded by Los Zetas. In the brutal logic of the cartel, non-compliance was unacceptable. The fire was not a random act of violence. It was a deliberate message of intimidation, meant to show that defiance would be met with the harshest possible punishment. Unlike a typical territorial clash between rival gangs, this attack targeted civilians, demonstrating how cartels had escalated their methods to maintain control and instill fear. The scale and audacity of the attack shocked Mexico and drew international attention. Monterrey, known for its thriving economy, universities, and industrial significance, had never witnessed such extreme violence directed at ordinary citizens. The image of a modern city reduced to a scene of smoke, fire, and death challenged the perception that cartel violence only affected border towns or remote regions. This attack underlined a disturbing truth. In Mexico's drug war, no place was truly safe, and the consequences of standing up to a cartel could be catastrophic. In the aftermath, authorities arrested several individuals connected to the crime, but questions remained about the role of corruption, complicity, and the limits of law enforcement in addressing cartel violence. The victims' families were left to grapple with unimaginable loss, while the nation mourned a tragedy that could have been avoided if extortion and intimidation had been confronted more effectively. The president at the time, Felipe Calderón, called the attack an act of terrorism, a rare acknowledgement that the violence was not merely criminal but designed to terrorize the population. The Monterrey casino attack has since become a symbol of the human cost of Mexico's drug war. It highlighted the extreme measures cartels were willing to take to enforce their will, the vulnerability of civilians, and the challenges faced by authorities in protecting citizens from organized crime. While buildings were rebuilt and some perpetrators brought to justice, the psychological scars remain. For many, the attack is a reminder of how violence can erupt in the most unexpected places, turning everyday life into a battlefield. Ultimately, this tragedy emphasizes that cartel influence is not just a problem of drugs or turf. It is a systematic threat to society, where fear is a weapon, and human lives can be destroyed for defiance. The Casino Royale fire is remembered not only for its devastating death toll, but also as a stark warning about the reach and brutality of organized crime in Mexico, and the urgent need to protect ordinary citizens from becoming victims of such unthinkable violence. It's a normal day in Uruapan, Michoacán, a city known for its vibrant markets, bustling streets, and the sweet aroma of fresh fruit. But in 2019, the city became the unwilling stage for a chilling performance, one that nobody would forget. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, a name that had been whispered in fear across Mexico, decided to make an unforgettable statement. 19 victims, yes, 19 were brutally killed, some hanging lifelessly from a bridge like grotesque ornaments, while others were dismembered and left with banners that screamed warnings to rival cartels. It was horror, delivered with cold, calculated theatrics. The bridge, a structure that usually symbolized connection and passage, was transformed into a stage of psychological warfare, a grim reminder of the ruthless power these cartels wield. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't a horror movie plot, even though it reads like one. This was real life, with real victims and families forever scarred. The CJNG's goal was clear: intimidation through spectacle. By publicly displaying such grotesque violence, they weren't just killing people. They were sending a message to anyone thinking of crossing them. Rival cartels, local authorities, even ordinary citizens, it was all warning. This is what happens when you stand in our way. And the bridge, that became more than a bridge. It became a symbol of fear, a monument to the extremes of cartel brutality. But here's the twisted part that makes this incident so infamous. It wasn't just about terror, it was about control. Mexican cartels like the CJNG operate in a world where territory and reputation are everything. showing dominance publicly is a strategic move. Hanging bodies in a visible spot isn't just cruelty, it's a power play, a psychological tool designed to shake rivals to their core and remind locals who really calls the shots. The banners left behind weren't random scribbles. They were threats, signatures of terror, and statements of authority. In essence, it was performance art for intimidation, but one where the canvas was human life and the brush strokes were unspeakably violent. The scale of the Uruapan hangings also shocked Mexico and the world because it highlighted a larger trend. Cartel violence isn't just secretive anymore. It's public, brutal, and theatrical. There's a calculated logic behind it, a dark kind of marketing strategy where fear itself becomes currency. And it works. People talk, news spreads, rival gangs rethink moves. Citizens live in constant caution. It's horrific, but disturbingly effective. And yet, amid all this darkness, there's a grim reality we can't ignore: the human cost. Families lost loved ones, communities were terrorized, and a city's sense of safety was ripped apart. Behind the banners and the spectacle were 19 lives extinguished, each with a story, a family, and a life that ended far too soon. The bridge hangings were a chilling reminder that cartel wars are not abstract. They are intensely personal and devastating. So, while we can describe the CJNG's actions as strategic, theatrical, or even organized, the underlying truth remains simple and tragic. This was murder on a public stage, a deliberate act meant to terrify and control, and a stark illustration of how cartel violence has evolved into something that's as psychological as it is physical. Uruapan's bridge may have stood still, but in 2019, it became a haunting symbol of fear, power, and the chilling lengths to which organized crime will go to dominate. When discussing the extreme violence of Mexico's drug cartels, few cases are as disturbing or as emblematic of calculated brutality as the actions of Santiago Meza Lopez, better known as El Pozolero. Operating in Tijuana during the 2000s under the orders of the Sinaloa cartel, he was responsible for the systematic disposal of human bodies using acid, a method that was both horrifying and alarmingly efficient. The nickname El Pozolero, which translates roughly to the stew maker, masks the grisly reality of his work. Victims, rivals, dissenters, or those unfortunate enough to be targeted by the cartel were placed into large vats where chemicals dissolved their remains. This method was designed to ensure complete elimination of physical evidence, reflecting the cartel's extreme focus on secrecy and operational control. The scale of his actions was staggering. Hundreds of people were reported to have been disposed of in this manner. While most criminal organizations rely on traditional methods of concealment, such as mass graves or dumping bodies in remote locations, the Sinaloa cartel's approach under El Pozolero demonstrated an unnerving level of planning and meticulousness, a chilling combination of efficiency and inhumanity. The discovery of these vats of dissolved bodies shocked both Mexico and the international community, highlighting not only the brutality of cartel violence, but also the challenges faced by law enforcement in investigating such crimes. Unlike shootings or public executions, where evidence remains visible, the chemical disposal of human remains made tracing victims and prosecuting perpetrators far more difficult. For the families of the disappeared, it represented a particularly cruel form of loss. Their loved ones were not only murdered, but effectively erased, leaving few traces and complicating efforts at closure or justice. The case became infamous not only for the scale and method of the killings, but also for the psychological impact it had on communities and authorities alike. It underscored the lengths to which cartels would go to maintain control, intimidate rivals, and eliminate perceived threats without drawing attention to themselves. El Pozolero's work serves as a stark example of how organized crime in Mexico has evolved beyond visible acts of violence to include highly secretive, methodical, and industrial forms of brutality. The case is also a reminder of the broader social and institutional consequences of cartel dominance: corruption, fear, and the erosion of public trust in law enforcement and governance. Beyond the immediate horror of his actions, the story of El Pozolero is emblematic of a larger system of violence that relies on dehumanization, intimidation, and the careful removal of evidence to perpetuate its operations. While media coverage often emphasizes the shock factor of his nickname or the grotesque details of body disposal, the more serious underlying reality is one of organized, calculated cruelty that challenges traditional notions of criminality and underscores the extreme danger posed by drug cartels. Ultimately, the case of El Pozolero is a sobering illustration of the extreme measures taken by criminal organizations to enforce power and control, and the devastating human cost of such actions. It is not merely a story of sensationalized violence. It is a grim reflection of systemic brutality, highlighting the intersection of criminal ingenuity and moral depravity. For Mexico, and for the global community, the legacy of these crimes serves as a reminder of the urgent need to address organized crime not only through law enforcement, but through comprehensive social, economic, and institutional strategies aimed at preventing the conditions that allow such extreme violence to flourish. In 2011, the quiet town of Allende in Coahuila, Mexico, became the stage for one of the most horrifying episodes in the country's ongoing battle with drug cartels. Allende had always been a small, close-knit community where daily life revolved around family, local traditions, and the routines of rural living. But in the summer of that year, the town was thrust into a nightmare of unimaginable violence. The Los Zetas Cartel, one of Mexico's most ruthless criminal organizations, arrived with a single, terrifying purpose of revenge. Believing that the residents of Allende had betrayed them by leaking information to the DEA, the cartel set out to punish the town in the most extreme and indiscriminate way possible. What followed was catastrophic. Dozens, possibly hundreds of townspeople were kidnapped, killed, and burned. Entire families vanished without a trace. Homes were set on fire. Streets became empty as fear took over, and the ordinary rhythms of life were replaced by a pervasive sense of dread. This was not a targeted assassination. It was a wholesale campaign of terror designed to send a message. Betrayal would not be tolerated, and those who opposed Los Zetas would face annihilation. Survivors described streets littered with abandoned homes, and the suffocating presence of fear that made even leaving one's house feel dangerous. Families were torn apart. Some never knew the fate of their loved ones, while others were forced to witness horrors that would remain with them forever. The Allende massacre is particularly infamous because of its scale and indiscriminate cruelty. Unlike many other incidents of cartel violence, which target rivals or specific individuals, this attack engulfed entire communities. It demonstrated the power and impunity of Los Zetas, who operated as though the law, morality, and human life were entirely irrelevant. The massacre left a permanent scar on the region not only physically, in burned homes and abandoned properties, but psychologically, in the fear and trauma experienced by those who survived. Generations of residents would grow up hearing stories of neighbors who simply vanished, of families that were erased overnight, and of a town that was almost wiped off the map. The tragedy of Allende also reflects a broader reality of the Mexican drug war. Ordinary people often bear the brunt of violence that is fundamentally political and economic. Cartels such as Los Zetas do not limit their actions to competition with rival gangs. They extend terror to civilians, using fear as a tool to maintain control, punish perceived disloyalty, and demonstrate their dominance. In Allende, the consequences were devastating. The massacre shocked the nation, exposing the horrifying lengths to which criminal organizations could go, and the vulnerability of small communities caught in the crossfire. It highlighted how quickly life can change in areas controlled by organized crime. What was once a peaceful town became a symbol of chaos, brutality, and fear. While the massacre itself is over, its legacy continues. Survivors struggle with loss and trauma. Families remain fragmented. The memory of that summer in 2011 serves as a grim reminder of the human cost of cartel violence. Allende is more than just a footnote in news reports. It is a symbol of what can happen when lawlessness and extreme brutality collide, and when innocent communities are punished for crimes they may not have committed. The story of Allende stands as a chilling example of the ruthlessness of Los Zetas and a somber reminder of the fragility of safety in areas dominated by organized crime.